Okay, welcome to Web Development Lesson 7. Today we will be talking about some things more in JavaScript, and then we will be able to tie them back into DOM manipulation. So we can use more advanced methods and do more stuff with DOM. And then we'll be going a tiny bit into CSS. So first of all, something that's very essential in a lot of websites is going to be time. When you're making like a game or anything that will use a timer, you're going to want to be able to get the time or the difference in time from one instance to another. So here JavaScript has the date class. To get a current time, you just do new date. This syntax is for basically any class. So a class is kind of like an object, except you can make copies of it. So it's like a template for you to do stuff with. When you run new date, you don't actually get string. You get something that's a special class. It's just called a JavaScript date. And although when you display it, it displays like a string, in reality, what it's actually doing is it's capturing that instance in time, and you can actually do operations with that. So if I go into the console now and I do something like current equals new date, it's going to give me this. Keep in mind that's not just a simple string, and then I do another new date, but then I take this and minus current, and it's going to be give me around 13,000 milliseconds. That means there was a delay of around 13 seconds. This is useful for you to make like stopwatches or to time something, and just shows like dates. They kind of act like numbers. You can subtract them, you can do operations with them. So if you want to use time, but you don't want to actually just get the instance in time, or you want like the browser to actually like wait for some time before you run something, like for example, if you're making a stopwatch, you can use timeouts. So timeouts, what they are, they're basically I'm giving the browser this function and I want it to run this function after a certain amount of time. So if I do set timeout of some function, so I'll just make it an alert in here. And then the second argument in set timeout is going to be the time in milliseconds. So 1 second is 1,000 milliseconds. I want this to execute 2 seconds later, so I'm going to put in here 2,000, hit enter, and then 2 seconds later, it gives me a pop-up. So for intervals are kind of like timeouts, except that instead of just running something once, you're actually running it every X milliseconds instead of just after X milliseconds. So if I take this and instead I do set interval, now I'm going to actually set this to a variable right here. Like, so usually this will be unnecessary. You can just run this, but the variable will come in useful later. If I click enter here, and it will give me a pop-up, another pop-up, another pop-up, another pop-up. It will keep doing this until basically eternity, or until I clear in interval and pass it in that variable. So that variable int v is actually referring to this interval, and I can clear the interval. So set that, and now the interval's gone. I'm no longer getting alerts. Where that's useful is if you want to run something and you use an interval, but then you don't want it to run after a certain period of time, or you just want to stop it when the user like clicks a button or something, you can just use a clear interval. So here I have an example from W3 schools of a countdown timer that uses intervals and timeouts to give you basically a countdown until 9:45 when this class ends. So if we look at the code here, we see that we're actually setting an interval for a function where the function is getting the time, and then this stuff here, it's just some math in order to get the exact number of days, hours, minutes, and seconds, and then it's just going to output it to a div with DOM manipulation, and here is just checking if the time has already passed, and then clearing the interval there. So this is a nice example that uses both date and intervals to create something that's pretty simple, and yet like you can use this for a countdown clock to some event, like the ones they have on television for like the New Year's balls drop or something. Okay, for persistent storage, you notice that if I set a variable, like I set a variable called storage um var in here, and I set it to a string, just set it to some random string, and then I reload, and then I try to get storage var, it's giving me an error because storage var is not defined currently because I reloaded the page. Everything starts from a blank slate. So if you don't want that to happen, if you want to have something that you can actually keep after a user reloads or exits the website and goes back on, you can use persistent storage options in JavaScript. So how this works is basically you have JavaScript accessing some sort of API that allows it to tell the browser, I want to store this on the hard drive, and the browser will do that for the JavaScript. And then when you load the page again, the browser is going to try and get that information back from the browser so that you can have persistent storage. The first and somewhat powerful way to store persistently is cookies. They're small text files that your browser will store on your hard drive, and basically any website can use them. Uh, you can actually view your cookies if you go to, so if I click this, go to cookies and site data, go here, and I see that actually all of these domains are using cookies for that on the site that I'm currently on. Local storage, it's a small key value structured storage object that does not expire. So you can store something there and it will be there pretty much indefinitely. And it's like its API is very simple in that you literally just have functions called like set and get. Then you have indexdb. This is probably like way more powerful than anything you'll have to use persistent storage for. What indexdb is mostly used for is if you want to run, like if you want to run a big file on your browser, like for example, a game or 3D like modeling software, something like that, and you're running it with a WebAssembly or like giant JavaScript file, but then you don't want really to access the server in order to download that file every time, you can use you can use IndexedDB to just store it and then run it as you please. You can also use it to store like giant video files that you may be like storing on your website for whatever reason. And then there are uploadable and downloadable files, which kind of are a bit more self-explanatory. You can use JavaScript to make file uploads, inputs, and then read those files as text or any like text-based option that you want. And then you can modify them and then download them onto your device. The downside to this is that the user has to actually like select upload and then the specific file and then download it again and then upload it again. And there's an option called readable stream that's a bit more complicated than just simply uploading and downloading files, where the browser actually has access to the file for a longer period of time and can change it continuously. So for now, we'll be focusing on just the first two, cookies and local storage. Cookies, so what they're used for example, if a user visits a site and the site asks them for their name, so like for example, an input and the user can tell the site their name, but then when the user reloads the site again, the website can like remember that information and then like say hi to them by name. Cookies are stored as text files. The syntax is very much like an object, where it's key value pairs. When you're setting a cookie, you're going to want to put in anywhere between 1 to 3 key value pairs. The first key value pair is going to be the actual cookie. So your key equals your value. And notice there are no like strings or anything here because this is not JavaScript syntax. This is all eventually going to be wrapped in a single string. So it's just separated by an equal sign. And then at the end, to separate each key value pair, you have a colon. Sorry, a semicolon. The second one you want to put in is expires. So this tells the browser when you want this cookie file to be deleted. If you don't put anything at expires, by default, it will delete this cookie whenever the user closes the browsing session, which is going to be a bit different for each browser, but normally it's just when you close the window or close down the whole browser application. And then the final one is going to be path. The path sets where the cookie is actually going to be stored and where it can be accessed from. So if you say you're on some website like slash some folder and then slash index.html and you store a cookie, if you don't specify path, then it's going to by default store it so that the whole domain can access it anywhere on that site. But if you set it so that only stuff inside that folder, so after slash folder, can access it, then if you go to the main site and try to access it, you will get an error because it does not exist there. It only exists within that path. And by default, path is going to be just a slash. So like for any site and then slash, that is going to be the default path for each cookie. So when you're storing a cookie, all you do is you're basically setting document.cookie to a string with these three key value pairs. And keep in mind though that it's the browser handles this in a special way. It's not just storing a variable or a key inside an object to a string. what you're doing here is essentially adding this part to the cookie. Yes, it's confusing. No, I do not know why they coded it this way, but it's just done this way, so we just have to deal with it. So first of all, like like the example from the last page, we have the username equals John Doe, semicolon, and then the expiration date, which is uh expires equals Saturday, 15th February 2025, 12 UTC, and then the path is slash, so we can specify different values on these two. And so these two are not necessary. If you don't put them, then the browser uses the defaults. They're basically just modifiers. To get cookies, you can also use document.cookie to do it, although it's not going to be the last thing you set document.cookie to. It's always going to be the collection of all the cookies. So, like for example, I've set three cookies. Now it's now document.cookie is going to be username equals John Doe, age equals 23, status equals approved, if I set those three cookies. Now notice we put in expires and path here, and those don't show up here because those are just modifiers. The browser takes them and they, based on that, they store the text file in a different location or have the text file be deleted at a different time. So those just essentially disappear and you can no longer access them after you set them. So this syntax is kind of strange. What you can do is you can use uh, something dot split to get individual pairs. So if I if I have I should probably do this on another. So if I set a few cookies here, so document dot cookie is equal to username is equal to user 1234. Oh yeah, sorry, I cannot do cookies on about blank because that's a security violation. So document.cookie equals user user equals 1234. Now, and then I set another one, and I'm saying user2 is equal to 8765, and then I get document.cookie. There's a ton of other cookies, but what I can do here is I can do document.cookie dot split, and I know that each one is separated by a semicolon, so I put in a semicolon here to basically turn it into an array. So here the first two are the ones I want. So then I can just do uh above, get the first element, and it's going to be user equals 1234. It can then split it by an equal sign to get the individual key and value. But that's basically just how you'll be working with cookies mostly. So because of the illogical way cookies work, usually when you use them, you're going to want to use some functions to, like the ones here, to get or set a cookie. So some of the stuff here we have not looked at yet. The code URI component is basically just if you go on some random website, okay, actually I will search something in the search bar here. So if you look at the search bar here, you see a bunch of weird symbols. Like here, there's an RLC equals. Uh, actually, I don't think. Google does this. So if I if I just add a query mark here and I say hello, 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 and I hit enter, you see these will actually be converted to %20s because that's the URI encodation of a space. Basically, because a URL can't contain just about any character, so the characters it cannot contain, it will just be decoded to something like a percentage sign and then a code. So that's just turning it back into the actual sign. Here we have some stuff going on with arrays. Substring is just going to be modifying the string. So instead of using those functions, I want you to actually open a GitHub code space and try and make some simple functions just to set and get cookies. You don't have to use like expiration or path for now, just to get and set cookies and delete cookies. An idea an idea for that would either be setting it to a blank string or setting the expiration date to something that's like before now so that the browser automatically deletes it. And keep in mind to update a cookie, you literally just set it again with document.cookie equals dot dot dot. So I'll give you around 6 minutes to do this. And this will just be in pure JavaScript for now, starting now. Okay, so that is about time. For a few simple functions, like I mentioned before, we can set cookie using a name value. So first function, where it's basically just setting a cookie, and then if there's a day's value, it converts it to a date where it will actually expire using two UTC string. And then it just sets it with document.cookie. For get cookie, uh, you're basically just splitting it and going through it to look for your cookie and then retrieving it. And then for erase cookie, all you're doing is just setting the cookie of that name to something that expires in 1970, so the browser deletes it immediately. Okay, now onto local storage. Local storage is less powerful, but it also is much simpler to use. You can just use local storage dot set item and get item. So if I set item to name to Harry, name to David, you can get the item using local storage dot get item. So local storage dot set item name Harry. And now it's going to be stored into my browser as a local text file, key value pairs, local storage dot get item name. Oh yeah, sorry, didn't capitalize that S. And it's going to give me Harry. Now, it's not really noticeable here, but the first time I did it, there was a, I would say like 200 to 500 millisecond delay before when I typed that in and it actually displayed. That's because local storage is actually storing everything on the hard drive, so it will take a while to retrieve it, which is why it's a bit less robust than cookies, and also cannot be used in cross-domain uses such as third-party cookies, which we'll get to in a bit. So if I to remove something, it's just local storage dot remove item name, and then I try to get the item again. It's gonna give me null because that item does not exist anymore. And if we set the item again, we can also just remove everything in local storage by using local storage clear. And then if I try to get the item again, it will give me null because I've cleared basically the whole local storage of this site. So basically local storage, use it for entry level stuff. Don't expect it to give you a ton of storage or basically be very permanent because the user can basically just delete something by going to like clear my browsing history and cache and clear it with the cache. So some examples where you would want to use cookies or local storage. So for example, a login page or just a regular site, hobby site, this will not be secure at all because like even I have an extension here. It's called Cookie Editor. You can just download it from the web store. What it does is you can look at all your cookies and you can add, you can delete, you can import, export your cookies. What that does, it makes it really easy for me to debug stuff when I'm using cookies, but it also means that you can really easily just use an extension or even just the console to get cookies to see the cookies, so don't expect this to be high security. And also something this is useful for if you're making a video game or something like a form. So I know Google Forms has this option where you can go there, you can fill out half of a form, you can close it out, and when you open it up again, that form will still have all you filled out inside it. That's done using uh I do not know if it's cookies or a local storage, but it's one of the two. At least if you're signed out. If you're signed in, it just stores it on your Google account. So there's some games like a dark room where it's just like a really simple it's just a really simple like text-based game, but then if you reload or open it up again, it it still has your previous progress in it. It does this by using cookies and just like storing your progress in a string. There are also stuff like storing preferences and personalization. So if you're making a web application or game, you want your users to be able to control how it looks, you can use local storage or cookies to store that the user likes the background a certain shade of like pink, or they like this font, or like their default settings for some game, especially if like the game doesn't have a login, you would want to use something that's just stored in the local device. However, there are stipulations with using cookies because cookies are actually pretty powerful. I can set a cookie here that's that belongs actually to, as you see, a lot of different Google sites, not just slides.google or docs.google. If I go to W3 School, sorry, button. It's just W3 schools, but notice it also has the www and regular W3 school. If I go to some website, uh, if I go to some random news website and let's hope that this doesn't lag my computer out, you see there are a ton of sites that can use cookies here. Like here's Yahoo, here's TV Pixel, what's the Taboola? There's even Google, there's Google Ad Services. So what what those domains are using the cookies for. They use them to track you. So i- if enough sites have their cookie like just on a tiny little 1 by 1 pixel of an image on their site somewhere, then they can set a cookie, and then when you visit another one of those sites or you visit a Google site, now Google can retrieve that cookie and say, oh, so you've been on these sites. So for example, if you've been looking at blenders, so like say you want to buy a kitchen blender, so you've been looking at Amazon blenders, you've been Googling up brands of blenders. Google knows that because of these cookies, and they know that you want a blender. So next time you go to an app to a site with Google Ads, there's a chance you'll get some ads or even a lot of ads about blenders. This is called targeted advertising, and personally, I don't like it. Some people like it because it's convenient, like you don't have to search up or research a lot because of the suggestions it gives you. And also that's kind of the point of advertising where you're giving ads to your target audience who want your product instead of just everyone. But the bad thing is these companies, they this way like they know stuff about you that you potentially don't want them to know. And it brings into question a lot of like privacy implications. So there is a European Union law called the cookie law that says you have to have a notice on your website asking users to consent to using cookies on the website and telling them to what extent uh, they are using the cookies and like what they're doing with these cookies. So if this is an article about the cookie law, so the cookie law is just a set of guidelines that governs the use of cookies on websites. Uh, so the cookie law is actually called e-privacy directive. It was introduced in 2002, and it pertains to basically all communication, and it helps privacy by saying that companies, they cannot put in place stuff to monitor or uh, block your communications with people. And then also, like, if they're going to be collecting data, then they need to tell you. So you may have noticed this. This says we value your privacy. We use cookies to enhance your browsing experience, serve personalized ads or contents, and analyze our traffic by clicking accept all you consent to our use of cookies. Apparently, this site also uses cookies. It's an article about the cookie law. So if I go in here, a lot of sites will have these where they have like a few sections of cookies where necessary cookies are just like you required to use the basic site because they're used for logins and stuff and storing keys for encryption. So now functional cookies, they can help do stuff like show social media, show different iframes. Analytics are basically just how this company sees like you as a user. They want to collect information from users to see like how their user base is doing, how well their website is doing, and that like how many people visit the site every day. And like they can use this to gauge how well they're doing as a whole. Performance cookies, uh, it says delivering a better user experience for the visitors. And this is also kind of a mandatory cookie. Advertisement, again, it's going to be stuff, it's going to be stuff like Google cookies or like here IFC, which is actually set by YouTube and it's used to track YouTube videos because apparently there's a YouTube video that's going to be linked in here somewhere and they're just basically s- more sketchy cookies. They just call these other cookies. Uh, so basically, if you do that, you can just say, okay, you can use cookies, but just only the necessary cookies. Technically, you should do that on basically every website in order to prevent being tracked by cookies. But let's be honest, it's a really big hassle when you just want to read something and you have to click through like four different buttons in order to say, I do not want you tracking me. So a lot of websites will use banners and pop-ups to do this, although some websites just put it in the footer. So we can take a look at some websites that will use cookies and have this cookie notice. So here we have a pop-up, and this one is like the other one, just like customized cookies. And notice here, this is made by OneTrust. This is not made by SurveyMonkey. What OneTrust and also the site we just looked at before does, they make these interfaces really easy to display. Like, so if I'm a website developer and I want to put a cookie banner that complies with the cookie law on my website, then I can just use one of these services, and then they have documentation on like I can just import their library, so like a JavaScript file that they made, and then I can run some like a few simple commands and be able to provide this like nice looking compliant cookie banner that I can use to create these banners without having fear of, oh, did I include this part of the cookie law? Did I include that part of the cookie law? So some more more recognizable brands. This is Burger King. You see here, there's also a cookies pop-up, basically the same thing. This is also by OneTrust. There's Nike here. Nike, they don't put it somewhere that's really recognizable. But yes. So at the very bottom here, there's just your privacy choices, and if you click into here, you just you just have don't sell my information and then like information about the privacy practices, mainly because I think Nike, this they change what's on their website based on location. So if I was in the EU and I was accessing the site, and they would probably also have a cookie pop up. And so a lot of companies, yes. So cookies pop up with this one. And yes, this one has also has a cookies pop up. And this is this is actually just from Ensuzo themselves. This is also Ensuzo is basically also a like they have privacy compliance mechanism, and you can just integrate this onto your site too, just like the other two we looked at. And then finally, we have tails.com, and then also big pop-up. Okay, now some more onto CSS. So we've gone through a tiny bit of CSS before to make stuff like actually look good. You want to be you want to know some more things. One of those things is going to be fonts. Fonts is something that's pretty much essential because if you don't have fonts, what you're basically seeing is just this kind of font, and it depends on the browser. Each browser has like kind of a default font, also based on what OS you are on. So I personally do not like this font much, and I don't think anyone I know from like website developing also just likes this font and keeps it on their website if they can help it. So fonts can be imported. They to use them, you have to import them. So you're saying, I want to take this font from this place and I want to use it. So what a font actually is, it's a TFF file that has like little images inside it, and those images are of the individual letters or symbols. And they're structured in a way that your computer can understand them and understand that like if you're displaying text, I'm going to be using these images to display them. So something that's really useful for fonts that I really like too is Google Font because they just have a giant collection of fonts. Like I can keep scrolling for quite a bit here. And so if we're importing some fonts, so say I want to import this font, we we can just there's just this button called get font here. There's a download option, which is if you want to use it like offline and stuff, where you can just download the TFF and then just uh like host it yourself. But usually the simplest method is just going to be uh just to use an embed. So Google Fonts is really nice to you. They give you web, Android, iOS, and Flutter ways to use the font. So in Google Fonts, and you can just link the font using a link element. So how you would link a CSS file in the head. So so basically three parts to it. There's a pre-connect, which just makes sure the connection is good. There's another pre-connect that is able to use cross origin to make sure that it can connect to fonts.gstatic, where they actually host the fonts. And then the final one is they just uh, import these. And if I go here, it's literally a font face file where it just has a bunch of CSS-like stuff where you see it just tells you. So for example, if I'm going to be using Acrylic test, it's just gonna go over here. It's gonna find the URL from the source. It's gonna go in here. And so like if I can't really view this because it's a walk2 and my computer does not have an extension to view walk2. That's basically just a font file. It just has the little images inside. So if we want to use this, what I find to be easier though is just if we use an import. So if we have a ready-made CSS, I'm actually going to be modifying this countdown time right here. We have around 7 minutes left in class, which should be able to get done. So if I import that, so right now I'm importing this font, Quicksand, I believe. Oh, no, I'm using caveats. Okay, actually, I'm just gonna delete caveats to make things a bit easier. Because Google Fonts, you can import two at a time, although I tend to do one at a time just for the sake of simplicity. And now here, the countdown is being displayed using this paragraph here, and we already have a style for the paragraph. So in here, I'm just going to add font family, and then this font family is going to be called Quickstand. So Quickstand, and I'm going to put that in the string. Let's open this and go in here. Yep. And the of this has changed. Notice that you probably prefer this to this too. But uh if you can chances are if you can find the font you want on Google Docs and you can use it in a Google Doc, you can probably find it on Google Fonts too. And you can find a ton of more fonts on Google Fonts. So also for just Quicksand here, we can also this is variable. Some fonts, like I believe uh Verha, there are different styles. So here is like 300. That's basically just the width of the stroke, how bold it is. It goes all the way up to 700. I can select ones to import separately so that I can get the look that I'm looking for. And also for each font, just keep in mind there is a license that tells you how you can use this font. Most of these are going to be under the SIO Open Font license, which means that you can use them for basically non-commercial purposes, so you don't make like anything that you don't make money off of. However, just check to make sure that like if you're going to be putting this in a website that like you're earning money off of, like a store, online store or something, just make sure that you're complying with the copyright. And then some other useful CSS properties. We have background color. We've talked about this before. Basically sets the background color of something. I will actually see here that is a path fill. Okay, never mind. So if I go to an about blank page that I can work with, documents dot get body style background ground color. is equal to lime. So like I can change the background color of any element, including the body. Color, it sets the text of something inside an element. So if I go in here and I put in some text, and I also edit the style so that there's a color. Oops. Color, what should I make this? Blue. And then I do this. We now have some blue text. And then there's also border. I can create a border around some element. So if I go if I go in here, I can put in a div and then I can put some text in here, div, and then I can add a border to this div. So style equals border. And border is kind of special in that it's actually kind of a shortcut CSS property. You can put in three different, like multiple things about the border. So right now I want a 5px that defines the stroke, the like how bolded you want the border to be. And then solid tells it you want it as a solid line instead of like a dashed line. And then uh for color, I'm just gonna put black. Oh, okay. So never mind. I need to edit that as HTML. And then I have my border there. Now, something that's like can add a touch to something that can add a touch to an element is going to be a border radius. So if I go on Google Font here, notice all of these buttons here, and like even if I hover over this one, it has rounded border, rounded border, rounded border. So that that is all using border radius. If I go in here, border radius 5px, and if I zoom in really close here, you can see that it's actually going to be rounded now. So that also, you can make that look really good on a website. There's font family, which I already talked about. Font size just basically sets the size of the font. So if I go in here again, font size 50px, I can make this really, really big font. And then basically margin and padding, you have space inside of an element so like padding is basically, imagine the element as a balloon where the border is basically just the rubber of the balloon. If you're blowing air into the balloon, so like inflating the balloon, and the balloon has the content in the middle of it, that's basically what padding is. You're padding it so that the thing inside the element, the content, has a bit of space between the immediate left or top of the element. And then margin is just you want this margin to you want this element to be away from the other element. So like for example, you see these two elements aren't really knit together, like they aren't touching. There's going to be a margin between them to keep them apart. Okay, so we're basically out of time now. And also according to our timer, expired. So I guess that's the end of class. Have a nice day. You're all free to go.